Many moons ago, in the beginning of the Testament, Beelzebub spoke of his son, who lingered around the Red Sea. Whilst Beelzebub was bound by Solomon and forced to comply with his every command, somehow Beelzebub was able to resist Solomon when he was asked to present his son. The idea here would be that either Beelzebub still maintained enough of his own power that he was able to resist Solomon at all, or that Beelzebub had no means of presenting his son because his son obeyed no one, not even him. Some might say that this was because Beelzebub's son was so powerful that he refused his own father's influence. However, Beelzebub did tell Solomon that a demon known as Ephipas would be able to bring the demon of the Red Sea, his son that is, to Solomon, implying that not only did Ephipas have some hold over his son, but that Ephipas was powerful enough to rise his son to face Solomon. Another idea is that Beelzebub's son came to realize that all the other demons had fallen to Solomon, and that Ephipas' summoning of him came only as a coincidence because he was going to come and face Solomon anyway, being the last notable demon left. The Testament told us that Ephipas promised to bring Solomon the Pillar of Air, and that the demon of the Red Sea would help him ferry it towards Solomon. Contrarily, this would imply that Ephipas did indeed have some control over Beelzebub's son, or at least some undisclosed agreement. The Testament tells us, "And Ephipas led the demon of the Red Sea with the column, and they both took the column and raised it aloft from the earth." Now, as mentioned in the last video, we are not told what the column, this pillar of air, actually is. Whilst it is mentioned throughout the Testament, Solomon never appears to explain what it is, suggesting that it may have been common knowledge at the time of the Testament's creation. However, since then, some have theorized that the pillar of air could be in reference to a constellation of some kind, given that Solomon later declares that it hangs in the air, and given its importance, one might say that it is in reference to the Milky Way itself. The statement here that both Ephipas and Beelzebub's son hold the pillar up implies that these two demons are actually conducive of life throughout the galaxy. You might linken these two to Atlas from Greek mythology, who is tasked with holding the sky from falling on the earth. Some might say that there is something virtuous about these two demons, given that they undertake such a burdensome task. But we also must remember that if the pillar of air is the galaxy, then these two demons aren't holding it up out of goodwill, but because they were enslaved by Solomon to do so. He continues, "And I outwitted these two spirits, so that they could not shake the entire earth in a moment of time. And then I sealed around with my ring on this side and that, and said, 'Watch.' And the spirits have remained upholding it until this day, for proof of the wisdom vouchsafed to me." Here we understand that Solomon wasted no time when he was approached by the demon of the Red Sea, and that he was able to bind both him and Ephipas simultaneously, going as far as to say that he outwitted them so that they could not shake the entire earth. Here we can gather that both Ephipas and Beelzebub's son intended to shake the earth, or cause some potentially catastrophic event to occur that would threaten the world. But Solomon is able to subdue them using the signet ring obtained from the Archangel Michael, and after having commanded the spirits to watch, he sees them holding up the pillar of air, or perhaps the galaxy, for all eternity. And there the pillar was hanging of enormous size in mid-air, supported by the winds, and thus the spirits appeared underneath, like air, supporting it. And if one looks fixedly, the pillar is a little oblique, being supported by the spirits, and it is so today. Here Solomon tells us of how large the pillar of air is, and both demons appear beneath it in the form of winds or air. This suggests that neither Ephipas or the son of Beelzebub are perceivable to us in their truest forms, but instead would appear to be invisible, like the air itself. If one was to look at the Milky Way, at least from Earth, I guess in some regards it kind of does look like a pillar, a slanted one anyway. You might say that Ephipas held the weight on one side and the son of Beelzebub held the weight on the other, and that together it created a pillar-like shape in the way it stood. This is why Solomon states that if one looked up at it, they would see the pillar as oblique. Solomon also tells us that these two spirits are bound to support the pillar of air, and that they are there even to this day. Of course, an idea that contradicts the pillar of air being a constellation, or the galaxy itself, is that Beelzebub's son is detailed as bringing it up from the depths of the Red Sea. This gives the idea that the pillar is actually a more tangible construct, and that whatever it was once submerged beneath the ocean. Another idea which perhaps holds more weight than the previous ideas is that the pillar of air is actually a manifestation of God, especially when we consider Exodus 12, as the son of Beelzebub later tells us. Some may know that when the Israelites were led out of Egypt by Moses, a pillar of cloud guided them during the day. Meanwhile, a pillar of fire kept them warm at night, both of which were divine manifestations of God himself. Whilst there appears to be a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, Exodus makes no reference to a pillar of air. However, because these pillars do exist in the Bible, and both are manifestations of God, it is not so out of the realm to conclude that the pillar of air is a manifestation of God as well, and whilst it does not lead anyone anywhere, it does have the purpose of trapping demons as we see here, and as we'll see later on. Having now trapped the son of Beelzebub, Solomon proceeds to finally interrogate him. He states, "And I, Solomon, questioned the other spirit, which came up with the pillar from the depth of the Red Sea. And I said to him, Who art thou, and what calls thee? And what is thy business? For I hear many things about thee." The demon replies, "I, O King Solomon, am called Abezethibod. I am a descendant of the archangel. Once as I sat in the first heaven, of which the name is Amelioth. I then am a fierce spirit, and winged, and with a single wing plotting against every spirit under heaven. I was present when Moses went in before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and I hardened his heart. I am he whom Linus and Lambres invoked homing with Moses in Egypt. I am he who fought against Moses, with wonders, with signs." So there's a lot of interesting things for us to dissect here. First, we learn of the name of Beelzebub's son as Abezethibod, and through this, we understand that Solomon, now knowing his name, maintains some power over him. Perhaps most interestingly, albeit confusingly, we learn that Abezethibod does not claim Beelzebub as his father, but instead determines that he is the descendant of an archangel. Unfortunately, he does not detail the archangel's name, and this leads us to believe that either Beelzebub was once an archangel himself, or that there is someone in the demon's genealogy who was an archangel of some kind. There are so many implications with this revelation that I'm surprised Solomon never bothered to challenge it. First of all, it implies that Beelzebub may have been an archangel, which could be why Solomon offered to seat him in a chair of honour. But it could also be why Beelzebub is able to resist Solomon when he demands to know more about his son. As a former archangel, the signet ring may have been less potent when used against him, and so there was some leeway as to what he could get away with. The other implication here is that archangels did indeed mate and have offspring, and that they were not exempt from producing wicked creatures themselves. Abezethibod is a living example of this, a demon that declares descendancy from an archangel, and yet is actually the son of the prince of demons. We've seen angels produce sinister offspring in Enochian legend, whereby the Watchers produced the Nephilim, so I suppose it isn't entirely far-fetched to assume that Abezethibod might actually be telling the truth in some capacity. He does also go on to say that he himself sat in the first heaven, perhaps as an angel himself, and that he once went by the name Amelioth, before coming to plot against every spirit under heaven. Again, it is frustrating that Solomon does not query any of this. We don't get to understand in what capacity was Abezethibod a member of heaven, if he was a member at all, nor what his role was. Obviously, we can assume that he was cast out of heaven, given that he now resides in the depths of the Red Sea, but little else can be deduced by this. Given that he plotted against every spirit from heaven, some might say that he may have been something of an angel of death, but that he'd gotten so overzealous in his duty that God cast him out, but this cannot be substantiated. Furthermore, Abezethibod does not appear to mention Beelzebub at all, despite Beelzebub making such a big deal about protecting him from Solomon. Was Beelzebub lying about this demon being his son, or was Abezethibod so beyond Beelzebub that he deemed him not worth mentioning? Abezethibod then claims that he antagonized Moses in Egypt, and that it was he who was behind much of his trials during this time. Out of anything that Solomon could have asked in response to these massive revelations, he chooses to keep it rather low-key by asking, "How wast thou found in the Red Sea?" And the demon answered, "In the exodus of the sons of Israel, I hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and I excited his heart and that of his ministers, and I caused them to pursue after the children of Israel. And Pharaoh followed me with all the Egyptians. Then I was present there, and we followed together, and we all came upon the Red Sea. And it came to pass, when the children of Israel had crossed over, the water returned, and hid all the host of the Egyptians and all their might. And I remained in the sea, being kept under this pillar. But when Epiphas came, being sent by thee, shut up in the vessel of a flask, he fetched me up to thee." Now of course, Abezethibod is talking about Exodus 12, where Moses parts the Red Sea, as he leads the Israelites away from the pursuing Egyptians. Here Abezethibod takes responsibility for having incited the Pharaoh against the Israelites, and encouraged him to chase them down. But of course, as we know, when Moses divided the Red Sea, and led his people through safely, he then closed the passage, and the Egyptians who pursued them were swept up in the crashing waves. Here we learn that Abezethibod had led the Egyptians, and that he was amongst them when the sea was brought back together. Here we learn that during this moment, that whilst the Egyptians perished, Abezethibod was trapped under the pillar of air. As mentioned earlier, when Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt, they were guided by the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, both of which were manifestations of God. The pillar of air, meanwhile, does not appear to guide anyone in the Testament of Solomon, but rather serves as a prison, or at least some kind of physical bond that detains demons. Not only is Abezethibod trapped by the pillar of air when he is under the sea, but he is also trapped by it now, along with Epiphas, as they are cursed to hold it up for eternity. Having heard all of this, Solomon glorifies God as is customary by this point. He warns the demons not to disobey him, as they remain supporting the pillar, though it appears that they are unable to resist him anyway, for they offer up little resistance beyond this point. In fact, Solomon declares that they both utter, "The Lord thy God liveth, we will not let go this pillar until the world's end. But on whatever day this stone fall, then shall be the end of the world." Here we can obviously see that the demons have no choice but to do as Solomon tells them to. They are sentenced to hold up the pillar and agree to do this, though are most certainly begrudging. They even tell Solomon flat out that once the world has ended, presumably after the rapture, the pillar will fall, and then they will be free to wreak the havoc that they had originally intended. Here they tell Solomon that in the world's final days it will most certainly be a scary place, for they and every other demon which has since been bound will run amok of what is left and reclaim that which they deem belongs to them. Whilst it is easy to see Solomon as the victor here, having successfully bound every demon he was faced with, you might also say the victory was bittersweet. Despite binding the demons, it is evident that they will one day escape, and whilst this was unlikely to ever happen in Solomon's lifetime, he would no doubt have been irked that this was not really the end of the demon's wrath. If anything, Solomon's battles were merely just band-aids placed over an infected wound, one that in the distant future, according to the Testament, would come to fester. While Solomon would be championed by his people and revered for his mastery over the demons, there does remain one final encounter. An encounter that would see him stumble off the righteous path and see the Spirit of God depart from him. But that's all we have time for on this penultimate episode of the Testament of Solomon. In the next and final episode, we'll be discussing the promise made by the seventh sister, that she would one day come to achieve her desire and that she would be triumphant, where Solomon would not. Our demon-slaying king faces his toughest challenge yet, but not fire-breathing demons, nor demon dragons, or any kind of malicious spirit, but instead the flesh of a woman. It all comes to an end next time in the downfall of Solomon. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's video, then don't forget to leave it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.